My parents gave me medical power of attorney at 12, so I could take care of my grandmother with dementia and my brother on a ventilator, while they vacationed in Switzerland. When I finally called 911, during a crisis, they told CPS I had Munchausen by proxy. I just stared at the wall while they built their case against me. That was 3 years ago. This morning, they walked into prison while I got accepted into college. My parents decided I would be the full-time caretaker for both my grandmother with dementia and my 9-year-old brother on a ventilator. I was 12 when they handed me the medical power of attorney papers and said this was why they had an eldest daughter. Mom and dad were both surgeons at the top hospital in the state. They explained that their careers saved lives and they couldn't risk taking time off. Dad actually said the words, "We make too much money to quit," while adjusting his Rolex. Mom nodded and added that family takes care of family. She said it like she was doing something noble instead of abandoning her sick mother and disabled son. Grandma had been diagnosed with aggressive dementia 6 months earlier. She went from forgetting names to not recognizing faces to becoming violent when confused. My little brother Noah had muscular dystrophy and needed a ventilator to breathe. He also had a feeding tube and required specialized equipment that beeped and alarmed throughout the night. Our house was this massive Victorian mansion my parents bought to impress their doctor friends. 3 stories with endless rooms that felt more like a medical facility than a home once they moved in all of Noah's equipment. They set up Grandma in the room next to his so I could monitor both at once. The day they officially handed over responsibility was burned into my memory. Mom pulled out a binder thicker than my textbooks and started flipping through medical charts. I had to record vitals every hour for both of them, blood pressure and oxygen levels and medication schedules and feeding times. Dad showed me videos on YouTube about changing ventilator tubes and managing dementia outbursts. If either of them dies under your care, you'll be charged with manslaughter, Dad said while installing security cameras in every room. These are for safety monitoring. But I knew they were really to make sure I never left my post. Life became a nightmare cycle of medical emergencies. Grandma would mistake me for my dead aunt and grab my wrists hard enough to leave bruises. She'd scream that I was trying to poison her when I brought her pills. Once she threw her dinner plate at my head because she thought I was a burglar. Meanwhile, Noah's ventilator would start shrieking its alarm, and I'd have to leave her mid-meltdown to adjust his tubes or suction his airways. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight in 3 years. Teachers stopped asking why I fell asleep in class. My friends stopped inviting me places because I always had to cancel. One time, Grandma escaped the house while I was changing Noah's feeding tube. I had to wheel him outside in the freezing cold with all his equipment because I couldn't leave him alone. We found her trying to break into a neighbor's car because she thought it was 1987 and she was late for work. Noah broke my heart the most. He'd cry and beg me not to leave when I had to use the bathroom. His eyes would fill with tears and he'd type on his communication device, "Please don't go." He was terrified that his ventilator would fail and no one would hear the alarm. He wasn't wrong to be scared. The machines were old and my parents refused to upgrade them. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. Grandma was having her worst episode yet. She thought I was holding her prisoner and attacked me with her walker. I was trying to calm her down when Noah's ventilator started making a grinding noise I'd never heard before. The alarm was different too, urgent and sharp. His oxygen levels were dropping fast and his lips were turning blue. I ran to him and checked all the connections, but nothing worked. Grandma followed me, still swinging the walker and screaming. Noah's eyes were huge with panic as he struggled to breathe, his little hands clutched at his throat. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 for the first time in 3 years. The paramedics found me doing manual ventilation on Noah while Grandma hit my back with her fists. When they loaded them both into ambulances, I told them everything. How I'd been their only caregiver since I was 12, how my parents were in Switzerland at a medical conference, how I hadn't been to school in a week. The hospital social worker sat with me while I slept 16 straight hours in the family lounge. When I woke up, she had questions. So many questions. I showed her the binder and the medical power of attorney and the security footage of me managing everything alone. She made phone calls with her lips pressed in a thin line. My parents flew back immediately and arrived at the hospital playing the perfect concerned family. Mom actually had tears in her eyes as she told the social worker I must have dismissed the home health aides they'd hired. Dad produced paperwork showing round-the-clock caregivers who mysteriously never appeared on the security cameras. They suggested I'd been hiding them away because I was possessive of Noah and Grandma. The social worker separated us for interviews. My parents painted a picture of a troubled teen who wanted attention. They showed edited security footage of me being rough with Grandma during her violent episodes. They pointed out my failing grades and social isolation as evidence of mental illness. I sat in that small interview room watching my parents spin their web of lies. Mom actually told them she was worried about my attachment to Noah. She said I seemed to enjoy the medical emergencies. Dad mentioned finding medical websites in my search history. They exchanged concerned looks and whispered about getting me help. Then Dad leaned forward and said the words that made my blood freeze. "We think she might have been making them sicker. For attention. You know, like that syndrome." "What's it called, honey?" Mom dabbed at her eyes. "We need to contact CPS claiming protagonist has Munchausen by proxy." The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. The social worker's pen stopped moving across her notepad. She looked between my parents and me with an expression I couldn't read. My hands started shaking under the table. Mom reached for Dad's hand and squeezed it. They'd rehearsed this performance on the flight back. Every concerned glance, every worried sigh calculated for maximum effect. The social worker wrote something down and asked them to wait outside. When the door clicked shut, she turned to me. Her eyes were kind but professional. She asked me to tell her everything from the beginning, not the version my parents wanted her to hear, the truth. I started with the day they handed me the medical power of attorney, how they'd called me into Dad's study and explained my new responsibilities like they were giving me chores. The social worker asked about school attendance. I showed her my phone with dozens of emails from teachers asking where I'd been. She photographed each one. She asked about the home health aides my parents claimed to have hired. I pulled up our doorbell camera app and scrolled through 3 years of footage. The only people who ever came to our door were delivery drivers dropping off medical supplies. No aides, no nurses, no help. The social worker made copies of everything. She asked about my daily routine. I walked her through it hour by hour. The 5 a.m. medication schedule, the breathing treatments every 4 hours, the feeding tube cleanings, the diaper changes for Grandma when she forgot how to use the bathroom, the violent episodes I had to manage alone. She asked about my injuries. I rolled up my sleeves sleeves to show the bruises from Grandma's grip, the scratches on my arms from when she'd panic and claw at me. The social worker took photos of each mark. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Did I have any proof my parents knew about the situation? Any texts or emails showing they were aware I was alone with Noah and Grandma? I opened my text messages and scrolled back 3 years. Message after message begging them to come home. Photos of Noah's equipment malfunctioning. Videos of Grandma's violent episodes. Their responses were always the same. Handle it. You're being dramatic. We're busy saving lives. The social worker's expression hardened as she read. She asked for permission to download the entire conversation history. I gave it immediately. She left me alone for 20 minutes. Through the door, I could hear muffled voices. My parents' calm explanations. The social worker's questions getting sharper. Then silence. When she returned, 2 other people followed her. They introduced themselves as CPS investigators. They explained they were opening an immediate investigation into medical neglect and abandonment. Not of me. Of Noah and Grandma. My parents were brought back in. Their perfect composure cracked when they saw the investigators. Mom's voice went high and tight as she insisted this was all a misunderstanding. Dad tried to take control, using his doctor voice to explain how troubled I'd been lately. The lead investigator cut him off. She placed printed screenshots of our text conversations on the table. 3 years of me begging for help. 3 years of them refusing to come home. 3 years of medical emergencies I'd handled alone at 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Mom tried to claim the texts were taken out of context. The investigator placed the doorbell camera footage logs next. No home health aides, no visitors, just me, alone with 2 medically fragile family members every single day. Dad's face went red. He accused me of deleting footage of the aides. The investigator asked for the names and contact information of these supposed caregivers. My parents exchanged glances. Mom said she'd have to check her records at home. The investigators explained what would happen next. Noah and Grandma would remain in the hospital pending the investigation. I would be placed in temporary foster care. My parents would be interviewed separately. All their claims would be verified. My parents exploded. Dad stood up so fast his chair fell backward. He pointed at me and said I was destroying our family. There's something unsettling about how quickly these parents created their story on that flight back. The way they walked in with ready-made tears and perfectly timed worried glances makes me wonder how long they've been preparing for this possibility. Mom cried that I was sick and needed psychiatric help. They demanded to speak to supervisors, threatened to sue everyone in the room. The investigators remained calm. They explained that threatening CPS workers was inadvisable. They reminded my parents that everything was being recorded. They suggested my parents contact their attorneys. I was taken to a different room while my parents were escorted out. The social worker sat with me and explained what would happen next. A foster family was already being arranged. I would be able to visit Noah and Grandma with supervision. The investigation would be thorough. She asked if I had any questions. I had hundreds, but only one came out. Would Noah and Grandma be okay? She promised they would receive proper care. Real nurses, real doctors, real help. The foster parents picked me up that evening. They were an older couple who specialized in emergency placements. Their house smelled like coffee and cinnamon. They showed me to a small bedroom with a real bed and clean sheets. No medical equipment, no alarms, no cameras. I slept for 14 hours straight. The next morning brought a flurry of appointments. A doctor who examined my injuries and documented them for CPS. A therapist who would help me process the trauma. An education specialist who would work on getting me back in school. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from my parents. Accusations, threats, demands that I recant everything. The foster parents helped me block their numbers. The CPS investigation moved quickly. Investigators visited our house and reviewed all the security footage my parents had installed to monitor me. Hours and hours of video showing me alone, managing medical crises, being attacked by Grandma, frantically trying to keep Noah breathing. They interviewed the neighbors who confirmed they'd never seen any caregivers coming or going. They spoke to my teachers who described how I'd gone from a straight A student to barely attending class. They reviewed Noah and Grandma's medical records showing missed appointments and delayed treatments. My parents hired expensive lawyers who tried to spin the narrative. They claimed the security footage was edited. They produced fake contracts for home health companies. They suggested I'd threatened the non-existent aides to stay away. But the evidence was overwhelming. The doorbell camera had cloud storage my parents didn't know about. Every single day for 3 years showed the truth. No aides, no help, just me. The investigation uncovered more. My parents had been claiming government benefits for providing home care while using that money for vacations and conferences. They'd filed false insurance claims for services never provided. What started as neglect revealed itself as fraud. 2 weeks into the investigation, I was allowed a supervised visit with Noah. He was in a specialized pediatric unit with round-the-clock nursing care. His equipment had been upgraded. His color was better. When he saw me, he typed frantically on his new communication device. "Are you okay? I was so scared. Where are Mom and Dad?" I explained as simply as I could that he was safe now. Real nurses would take care of him. I would visit whenever allowed. He didn't have to be afraid anymore. He typed for a long time before showing me the screen. "I'm sorry you had to take care of me. It wasn't fair." I hugged him carefully around all the tubes and wires, told him it wasn't his fault, that I loved him, that everything would be better now. Grandma was in a memory care unit, properly medicated and supervised. Her violent episodes had stopped. She didn't recognize me during the visit, but she seemed calmer. The staff said she was adjusting well. The foster parents drove me to these visits without complaint. They made sure I ate regular meals. They enforced a bedtime. They asked about my day. Normal things that felt foreign after 3 years of crisis mode. 3 weeks into the investigation, the other shoe dropped. The hospital where my parents worked had opened their own investigation. Colleagues came forward describing concerning behavior, how they'd brag about never taking time off, how they'd dismissed other doctors who took family leave as weak. The hospital's internal review board scheduled interviews with every doctor who worked alongside my parents. I learned this from the CPS investigator during our weekly check-in at the foster home. She explained that medical professionals had a duty to report suspected neglect, and several nurses had finally come forward with concerns they'd harbored for years. My foster mother, Beatrice, sat beside me during these meetings. She'd retired from teaching special education and understood medical terminology better than most. Her presence helped me feel less alone as the investigation expanded beyond what anyone initially expected. The lead CPS investigator showed me a timeline they'd constructed. 3 years of conference attendance records. records. My parents had been gone 247 days out of the past 1,095. The dates lined up perfectly with my text messages begging for help. They'd documented every medical emergency I'd handled alone, while my parents presented research papers in luxury hotels. During the 4th week, my parents attempted a new strategy. They hired a private investigator to follow me. I noticed the same car outside the foster home, at my therapy appointments, even at the grocery store when Beatrice took me shopping. The foster parents reported it immediately. CPS added stalking and intimidation to their growing list of concerns. My therapy sessions became crucial evidence-gathering opportunities. The therapist, with my permission, documented the medical knowledge I'd been forced to acquire. I could recite medication dosages, recognize symptoms of respiratory distress, perform emergency tracheostomy care, and manage violent dementia episodes. No 15-year-old should know these things through hands-on experience. The investigator asked me to walk through our house with her. My parents' lawyers were present, along with a court-appointed advocate for me. The security cameras my parents had installed became their biggest mistake. The footage showed me changing Noah's ventilator tubes at 3 a.m., me restraining Grandma during violent episodes, me doing chest compressions when Noah's heart stopped briefly, me cleaning up after Grandma's accidents, always alone. My parents had made one critical error. They'd connected the cameras to a cloud service for remote viewing during their trips. They thought they'd deleted the archived footage, but the service kept backups for legal compliance. 3 years of evidence they couldn't deny or explain away. The house tour revealed more than anyone expected. I showed them the closet where I'd stored medical supplies bought with my birthday money when my parents forgot to order them, the calendar where I'd tracked Grandma's lucid moments, growing fewer each month, the notebook where I'd recorded every seizure Noah had, every medication change, every emergency. In Noah's room, I demonstrated the ventilator maintenance routine. The investigator watched me check connections, clean tubes, and test alarm systems with practiced efficiency. Her expression grew more troubled with each step. I'd become a trained medical technician through necessity, not choice. My parents' lawyers tried to argue this showed I was capable and willing. The investigator countered by asking what child should have to be capable of this. She pulled up state regulations requiring licensed medical professionals for such care. My parents had violated dozens of healthcare laws. The financial investigation uncovered a pattern of deception spanning years. My parents had claimed tax deductions for home healthcare expenses while pocketing the money. They'd billed insurance for nursing services never provided. They'd even applied for respite care grants, collecting checks while I provided round-the-clock care. Bank records showed lavish spending during their trips, 5-star hotels, expensive restaurants, shopping sprees. While I rationed medical supplies to stretch until their return, they'd spent thousands on designer clothes and jewelry. The investigator photographed receipts dated the same days as my desperate texts about running out of Noah's medications. My old teachers provided statements about my declining attendance and performance. One described finding me asleep in the bathroom, exhausted from being up all night with Noah's ventilator alarms. Another recalled me leaving class to take panicked calls about Grandma escaping again. They'd tried to help, but didn't know the full scope of my situation. The school counselor had documented numerous concerns. My weight loss from forgetting to eat while managing 2 patients. Bruises I'd explained away as clumsiness. Falling asleep during standardized tests. She'd tried calling my parents but could never reach them. Neighbors started coming forward once word spread about the investigation. The elderly couple next door described finding Grandma in their garden at midnight, confused and frightened, while I ran after her carrying Noah's portable oxygen tank. A woman down the street recalled seeing me pushing Noah's wheelchair through snow to the pharmacy, medical equipment balanced precariously on my lap. The mail carrier provided a statement about packages of medical supplies I'd signed for, sometimes waiting on the porch for hours because I couldn't leave Noah and Grandma alone inside. He'd wondered why a child was always the one accepting deliveries of feeding tubes and medications. My parents tried to discredit each witness. Their lawyers sent threatening letters. They claimed a conspiracy against successful doctors, but the evidence kept mounting. Every person who came forward had documentation. Photos, texts, security footage from their own cameras showing me alone with 2 medically fragile patients. Those parents really dug themselves into a hole with their own security cameras, didn't they? Nothing says we're great caregivers like 3 years of footage showing your kid doing all the work while you're sipping cocktails at medical conferences. The CPS investigator discovered something that changed everything. My parents had installed a hidden camera in my bedroom, claiming it was for my safety. The footage showed me setting alarms every 2 hours through the night. It captured me jolting awake to Noah's ventilator beeping, stumbling exhausted to his room. It recorded me crying silently after managing another of Grandma's violent episodes. This violation of privacy backfired spectacularly. The investigator fast-forwarded through 3 years of footage, documenting my sleep deprivation, isolation, and gradual physical decline. She noted weight loss, dark circles, trembling hands from exhaustion. The timestamp showed I never got more than 2 consecutive hours of sleep. My parents' hospital launched a formal review of their patient care. Concerns emerged about surgeries scheduled around conference dates, rushed procedures to avoid missing flights, delegated responsibilities that should have been handled personally. Their colleagues distanced themselves as the pattern became undeniable. During week 6 of the investigation, my parents attempted direct contact through their lawyer. They offered a deal. If I recanted my statements, they'd ensure Noah and Grandma received professional care going forward. They'd pay for my college, buy me a car, give me freedom. All I had to do was say I'd exaggerated. The investigator let me read their proposal. Every word dripped with manipulation. They painted themselves as misunderstood parents who'd trusted their mature daughter too much. They claimed the investigation was traumatizing Noah and Grandma, that I was being selfish by pursuing it. I responded by providing more evidence. Screenshots of them discussing which conferences had the best party scenes. Credit card records showing spa treatments during Noah's emergency hospitalizations. Email threads where they'd laughed about missing his birthday for a symposium in Hawaii. The forensic accountant found something damning. My parents had opened credit cards in my name when I turned 15, using them for medical supply purchases. They'd damaged my credit before I was old enough to understand what credit was. Identity theft added to their growing list of offenses. My therapy sessions revealed the depth of psychological damage. I couldn't sleep without checking imaginary monitors. Phantom ventilator alarms woke me nightly. I panicked in quiet spaces nurses, conditioned to constant medical equipment noise. The therapist documented symptoms of severe PTSD, anxiety, and depression. The foster family's support became invaluable. They attended every meeting, drove me to appointments, and created the stable environment I'd never known. Beatrice helped me catch up on schoolwork, patiently explaining concepts I'd missed during my years as a caregiver. Her husband Theodore taught me it was okay to be a teenager, to have fun without guilt. My parents hired a new legal team specializing in medical professional defense. They shifted tactics, now claiming I'd volunteered for caregiving duties, that they'd tried to hire help but I'd refused. They produced emails supposedly from me, declining nursing assistance. The technical investigator examined these emails. Metadata revealed they'd been created after the investigation began, backdated to seem legitimate. IP addresses traced to my father's laptop. Digital forensics exposed their fabrication attempt, adding evidence tampering to their charges. During a supervised visit with Noah, he shared something that broke the case wide open. He'd kept a journal on his communication device, hidden in a password-protected folder. 3 years of entries describing his fear, loneliness, and guilt about me sacrificing my childhood for his care. He'd documented every time he'd begged our parents to come home, every dismissive response. His journal included photos he'd managed to take. Me asleep on his floor after staying up all night monitoring his oxygen. Me doing homework while managing his feeding tube. Me crying after grandma had hit me, thinking he couldn't see. The timestamp showed these moments happened while our parents posted vacation photos on social media. The investigation team assembled a comprehensive timeline. Side-by-side comparisons of my parents' conference presentations with my texts about medical emergencies, their spa receipts next to my messages about Noah's ventilator breaking, their social media posts about saving lives while I kept their son and mother alive at home. Week 8 brought unexpected allies. Nurses from my parents' hospital reached out to CPS. They'd noticed patterns, like my dad scheduling complex surgeries before international trips, rushing through post-operative care, my mom dismissing residents who mentioned family obligations. They'd created a hostile environment for anyone prioritizing family over career. The hospital's review found liability concerns. My parents had lied on forms requiring disclosure of dependents needing care. They'd claimed to have adequate childcare arrangements while knowing their minor daughter was sole caregiver to 2 medically fragile family members. Insurance fraud investigations began. My parents made one last desperate attempt. They hired a child psychologist to evaluate me, hoping to prove mental instability. The psychologist spent 3 sessions with me, reviewed the evidence, and wrote a scathing report about parentification, medical neglect, and child endangerment. Their own expert became a witness against them. The CPS investigation expanded to include criminal referrals, child abandonment, medical neglect, financial exploitation, identity theft, and fraud. Prosecutors began building cases. My parents' licenses faced review boards. Their hospital suspended them pending investigation outcomes. I continued therapy, slowly learning to exist without constant hypervigilance. The foster family introduced normal teenage experiences, movie nights without checking monitors, full nights of sleep without alarms, meals eaten while hot instead of cold from repeated interruptions. My grades began improving with consistent school attendance. Teachers marveled at my potential when not exhausted and traumatized. I joined study groups, made tentative friendships, discovered interests beyond medical care. The education specialist helped me see possibilities beyond survival mode. Noah thrived in professional care. Proper nursing meant consistent therapy, better equipment, and medical attention from trained staff. His communication improved. His color returned. He gained weight. During visits, he expressed joy I'd never seen while he was under my overwhelmed care. Grandma received appropriate memory care. Medication management reduced her violent episodes. Trained staff recognized triggers I'd had to learn through painful trial and error. She remained confused but calmer, safer, better cared for than I could manage alone. The investigation revealed my parents had known exactly what they were doing. Emails between them discussed the convenience of having me handle caregiving. They'd calculated the savings versus hiring professionals. They'd joked about their live-in nurse while I struggled to keep their family members alive. As week 10 approached, the full scope became clear. 3 years of evidence painted an undeniable picture. My parents had systematically abandoned their responsibilities, exploited their minor daughter, committed financial fraud, and endangered 3 lives for their convenience. The investigator compiled everything into a massive report. Thousands of pages documenting neglect, abuse, and criminal behavior. Photos, videos, financial records, witness statements, expert testimonies. The weight of evidence was crushing. My parents' lawyers negotiated frantically as consequences mounted. The hospital began termination procedures. The medical board scheduled hearings. Criminal charges were filed. Their reputations crumbled as colleagues learned the truth. The very career they'd prioritized over family began disappearing. I focused on healing and rebuilding. Therapy helped process the trauma. The foster family provided stability. School became manageable without caregiving duties. I dared to imagine a future where I wasn't responsible for keeping anyone alive. The investigation's findings were damning beyond what anyone expected. My parents faced losing their medical licenses, criminal prosecution, financial ruin from fraud charges, and complete loss of custody. Their choices had consequences they never anticipated when they handed their 12-year-old daughter those medical power of attorney papers. As the investigation entered its final phase, I prepared for whatever came next. The evidence was overwhelming. The truth was documented. Justice moved slowly but steadily forward. My parents had built their own downfall through arrogance, greed, and callous disregard for their family. The foster parents helped me understand I wasn't responsible for the consequences my parents faced. They'd made choices. They'd committed crimes. They'd endangered lives. The investigation simply revealed what they'd hidden behind their medical degrees and professional success. I visited Noah one last time before the final hearing. He typed a message he'd been composing for days. He thanked me for keeping him alive but said no child should have carried that burden. He wanted me to have the childhood I'd sacrificed for his care. His forgiveness and understanding meant everything. The investigation team prepared for the final phase. Criminal referrals were complete. Evidence was organized. Witnesses were ready. My parents would face the consequences of their choices. The very cameras they'd installed to monitor me had recorded their crimes in undeniable detail. As I sat in the foster family's living room, doing homework without interruption, I realized how different life could be. No alarms, no medical emergencies, no violence to manage. The camera in her bedroom, recording years of sleep deprivation, and makes me wonder if the parents ever watched any of it before now. Strange how their own surveillance became evidence against them when they never bothered checking what their daughter was actually going through each night. Just quiet evening with people who cared for me without expecting me to sacrifice everything in return. The lead investigator called with an update. The prosecutor was confident in the cases. Multiple agencies were coordinating. My parents' attempts to obstruct had only added charges. Their privileged position couldn't protect them from documented evidence of systematic neglect and exploitation. I thought about the 12-year-old girl who'd been handed those papers 3 years ago. She'd been terrified but determined to protect her brother and grandmother. She'd sacrificed her childhood, education, and health. She'd survived what no child should endure. Now, at 15, I was learning to be a teenager. The investigation would conclude soon, but my healing had just begun. With proper support, therapy, and time, I might reclaim some of what was stolen. The future held possibilities beyond being an unpaid, untrained caregiver. My parents had claimed family takes care of family. They'd been right, just not in the way they meant. I'd cared for Noah and Grandma when they wouldn't. Now, a foster family cared for me. CPS cared about justice. The community cared about truth. The investigation moved toward its conclusion with momentum my parents couldn't stop. Their web of lies had unraveled. Their crimes were documented. Their victims would receive justice. The very system they'd tried to manipulate would hold them accountable. The final CPS hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Beatrice helped me pick out appropriate clothes while Theodore made breakfast. My hands shook as I buttoned the cardigan she'd bought me. The investigator had warned this would be intense. At the courthouse, my parents arrived with their third legal team. They wore matching gray suits and carried leather briefcases. Mom's makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Dad's usually perfect hair looked disheveled. They avoided looking at me as we entered separate waiting rooms. The lead investigator met with me first. She reviewed the evidence one final time. The fabricated emails, the deleted security footage they thought was gone forever, the credit cards opened in my name, the insurance fraud totaling over $40,000. She showed me their final recommendation report. My advocate explained the process. The judge would review all evidence. My parents would present their defense. Various witnesses would provide testimony. Then decisions would be made about Noah and Grandma's care, custody arrangements, and referrals for criminal prosecution. The hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined. Wood paneling covered the walls. A stenographer sat ready at her machine. The judge entered and everyone stood. She was an older woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. My parents' lawyer went first. He painted them as dedicated doctors who'd made an error in judgment. He claimed they'd believed I was mature enough to handle some caregiving duties with professional help. He produced more fake documents showing hired caregivers who'd mysteriously vanished from all records. The CPS investigator systematically destroyed each claim. She presented the doorbell camera footage showing 3 years of no visitors. She displayed the timeline comparing my desperate texts to their vacation receipts. She showed Noah's journal entries documenting his fear and isolation. When she played the bedroom surveillance footage my parents had secretly installed, the room fell silent. Everyone watched me, at 13, setting alarms every 2 hours, getting up exhausted to check Noah's ventilator, crying alone after Grandma's violent episodes. The judge's expression hardened with each timestamp. The forensic accountant testified next. She detailed the financial fraud with spreadsheets and bank records. Government benefits claimed for non-existent care. Insurance billing for services never provided. Credit cards opened in my name and maxed out on medical supplies. The total exceeded what most people made in a year. My therapist provided a written statement about my PTSD symptoms, the phantom alarms that woke me, the hypervigilance I couldn't turn off, the panic attacks in quiet spaces. She emphasized that no child should have acquired the medical knowledge I possessed through hands-on trauma. Teachers submitted written statements about my declining attendance and performance. The school counselor's records showed my weight loss and exhaustion. Neighbors provided photos and videos of me managing medical crises alone. The mail carrier confirmed years of medical supply deliveries signed for by a child. The hospital's representative testified about my parents' pattern of scheduling surgeries around conferences, their dismissive attitude toward colleagues who took family leave, the liability concerns from lying about dependent care arrangements, their suspension pending the outcome of this hearing. Noah's care team provided updates on his improvement with professional nursing, his weight gain, better color, improved communication. They emphasized how delayed his development had been from inconsistent care. With proper support, he was thriving in ways I could never have managed alone. Grandma's memory care facility reported similar improvements. Proper medication management had stabilized her moods. Trained staff prevented the violent episodes I'd endured alone. She was calmer, safer, better cared for than a child could provide. My parents' lawyer tried damage control. He suggested I'd exaggerated the situation, that teenagers were dramatic, that my parents had trusted me too much. He claimed the investigation was destroying a family of dedicated medical professionals. The judge asked him directly about the security footage, the 3 years of evidence showing me alone, the bedroom surveillance my parents had hidden, the deleted footage they'd tried to destroy. His explanations grew increasingly desperate. Then came the moment that changed everything. The investigator produced one final piece of evidence, an email chain between my parents from 2 years ago. They'd discussed whether to hire help for the summer. Mom had written that I was handling things fine and hiring nurses would cost more than their Greece vacation. Dad had responded that I seemed to be managing well enough, that it was good preparation for adult responsibilities, that the money saved could fund their research presentation in Tokyo. They'd literally chosen vacations over their children's care. The judge called a recess. My parents huddled with their lawyers, voices rising in panic. Mom kept glancing at me with an expression I'd never seen before, fear. Dad's hands shook as he signed documents his lawyer thrust at him. When we reconvened, their lawyer announced they would no longer contest the CPS findings. They acknowledged the evidence was overwhelming. They agreed to all recommended custody changes and wouldn't fight the criminal referrals. In exchange, they asked for consideration regarding their medical licenses. The judge wasn't sympathetic. She stated that medical professionals who would endanger their own children couldn't be trusted with patients. She accepted their acknowledgement but made no promises about license proceedings. The medical board would make independent decisions. The final orders were comprehensive. My parents lost all custody rights to both Noah and me. They were required to pay child support and reimburse the government for fraudulent benefits claimed. The criminal referrals would proceed. They were banned from contacting us without court supervision. Noah would remain in specialized medical foster care with the family who'd been caring for him. They were trained in his complex needs and had already bonded with him. He'd finally have the consistent professional care he deserved. Grandma would stay in the memory care facility. A court-appointed guardian would manage her affairs. My parents were required to pay for her care from the money they'd saved by exploiting me. She'd have dignity in her confusion, something I couldn't provide alone. I would remain with Beatrice and Theodore, who'd already started permanency paperwork. They wanted to provide a stable home through high school and beyond. For the first time in 3 years, I had adults who cared for me without expecting me to sacrifice everything. The judge addressed me directly before closing. She acknowledged what I'd endured. She praised my strength in speaking truth despite my parents' manipulation. She assured me that none of this was my fault, that no child should have faced what I did. As we left the courthouse, my parents were served with additional papers. The hospital had officially terminated their employment. The medical board had scheduled emergency hearings. The prosecutor's office had filed formal charges. Their colleagues who'd once admired them now distanced themselves completely. I watched them walk to their car, shoulders slumped in defeat. They'd lost everything they'd prioritized over family. Their careers, reputations, and wealth crumbled because they'd chosen conferences over children. They'd built their success on the back of their eldest daughter, and it had finally collapsed. Back at the foster home, Beatrice had prepared a celebration dinner. Nothing fancy, just my favorite foods and a cake she'd baked. Theodore hung a banner that read, "New Beginnings." We ate together like a real family, talking about school and normal teenage things. That night, I slept without setting alarms. No phantom ventilator beeps woke me. No panic about checking monitors. Just peaceful sleep in a room without medical equipment. The silence that had once terrified me now felt like freedom. The next weeks brought rapid changes. The prosecutor's office built their cases methodically. My parents' attempts to negotiate plea deals were rejected. They faced multiple felony charges for fraud, child endangerment, and identity theft. Their assets were frozen pending restitution orders. Mom's email literally said hiring help would cost more than their Greece vacation. Imagine typing that out and thinking, yes, this seems reasonable, while your kid runs a home hospital downstairs. I started attending school regularly. My grades improved dramatically without the exhaustion of caregiving. Teachers who'd written me off discovered I was actually bright when not sleep deprived. I joined the science club, made friends, went to football games. Therapy sessions shifted from crisis management to healing. We worked on reclaiming my identity beyond caregiver. I learned to exist without constant vigilance, to trust that others would handle their responsibilities, to be a teenager without guilt. I visited Noah weekly. He showed me his progress in physical therapy, proud of each milestone. His foster parents included me in decisions about his care. They valued my input while maintaining appropriate boundaries. He was becoming the happy child he'd never been allowed to be. The criminal cases proceeded steadily. My parents' lawyers negotiated frantically as evidence mounted. The financial fraud alone carried serious prison time. Add child endangerment and identity theft, and they faced consequences they'd never imagined when handing me those papers at 12. Their former colleagues testified about concerning patterns they'd noticed. Patients rushed through surgery so they wouldn't miss flights. Residents mocked for taking parental leave. A toxic culture that prioritized career over everything, embodied by my parents' choices. The medical board revoked their licenses after damning hearings. Patient care concerns combined with criminal charges made the decision unanimous. They'd never practice medicine again. The career they'd sacrificed everything for was gone forever. Beatrice helped me apply for programs to make up missed schoolwork. Theodore taught me to drive, patiently correcting mistakes. They attended parent-teacher conferences and school events. They gave me the normal teenage experience my parents had stolen. 6 months after the hearing, the criminal trials began. I testified via video link to avoid facing them directly. I recounted the exhaustion, isolation, and trauma of 3 years as an untrained caregiver. The prosecutor presented the mountain of evidence. The defense had little to counter with. Both parents were convicted on multiple counts. The judge considered their education and positions of trust as aggravating factors. They'd known better and chose exploitation anyway. Dad received 4 years in prison. Mom got 3 years plus probation. They'd served time in separate facilities. The day they reported to prison, I was at school presenting a science project. Beatrice and Theodore sat in the audience, proud of my work. I'd researched sleep deprivation's effects on adolescent development. My teacher said it was college-level work. I was finally using my trauma productively. Noah's adoption by his foster family was finalized that spring. They invited me to the celebration. He wore a suit and smiled bigger than I'd ever seen. His new parents clearly adored him. He had siblings now, other kids who saw him as a brother, not a burden. I spoke at the adoption ceremony. I told Noah how proud I was of his strength, how he deserved this loving family, how our parents' choices weren't his fault. He typed on his device that he loved me and always would, that I'd saved his life, but now others would keep him safe. Grandma passed peacefully in her sleep 8 months after the hearing. The facility called to let me know. She'd had good days near the end, moments of clarity where she'd smiled at caregivers. She'd been comfortable and dignified in her confusion. I attended her funeral with Beatrice and Theodore. My parents weren't permitted to come. As junior year began, I felt like a different person. I had friends, decent grades, college plans. The hypervigilance had faded to manageable levels. I could sleep through entire nights. I'd learned to trust others with responsibilities, to exist without constant crisis. The restitution payments from my parents' seized assets went into trust funds for Noah and me. Not enough to undo the damage, but something for our futures. The foster care stipend helped Beatrice and Theodore provide for me without strain. Money wasn't everything, but stability helped healing. I got my driver's license on my 16th birthday. Beatrice cried happy tears as I parallel parked successfully. Theodore gave me a used car they'd been fixing up secretly. Freedom to go places without medical equipment, to be spontaneous, to live like a normal teenager. College acceptance letters arrived senior year. Good schools with strong science programs. My essay about overcoming adversity resonated with admissions committees. I'd turned trauma into purpose, planning to study public health to help other vulnerable families. Graduation day was bittersweet. Beatrice and Theodore beamed from the audience. Noah's family brought him to watch. He cheered when they called my name. My parents watched from prison through whatever news reached them. They'd missed everything that mattered for conferences that meant nothing. That summer before college, I volunteered at a a respite center for family caregivers. I shared my story with exhausted parents and overwhelmed siblings. I helped them find resources I'd never known existed. I advocated for children thrust into adult responsibilities. The night before leaving for college, I sat with Beatrice and Theodore on their porch. We talked about how far I'd come. From a 12-year-old handed impossible responsibilities to an 18-year-old ready for appropriate challenges. They promised my room would always be there. I visited Noah before leaving. He was starting high school, nervous but excited. His parents had found an accessible school with excellent support. He'd joined the robotics club and had friends. He showed me his latest project, proud and confident. The scared little boy was gone. As I packed for college, I found the old medical binder my parents had given me. Hundreds of pages of charts and procedures no child should have memorized. I threw it in the recycling. That chapter was closed. I was ready to write new ones. The drive to campus felt like flying. Windows down, music playing, future spreading before me. I'd survived what no child should endure. I'd spoken truth when lies would have been easier. I'd protected my brother and grandmother when adults failed us. My dorm room was small but mine. No medical equipment, no alarms, no cameras, just space for an 18-year-old to discover who she was beyond trauma, to make friends, study hard, maybe even have fun, to be young in ways I'd never been allowed. That first night in the dorm, I called Beatrice and Theodore, told them about orientation and meeting my roommate, normal conversations about normal things. They reminded me they loved me and were proud that I could come home anytime, that I had a real family now. I thought about my parents in their cells, wondering if they regretted their choices, if they understood what they'd lost chasing prestige, if they realized conferences and recognition meant nothing compared to their children's well-being. Probably not. Some people never learned, but I had learned that family meant more than blood, that children shouldn't sacrifice childhoods for adult failures, that speaking truth mattered even when power tried to silence it, that survival could become strength with proper support. As I started college, I carried those lessons forward, ready to build a life of purpose from the ashes of trauma, ready to help others find their voices, ready to be the advocate I'd needed at 12. The girl who'd been handed those papers was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and finally free. Thanks for hanging out with me and letting me wonder about all this stuff with you today. Always fun to bounce these thoughts around together. Catch you later. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.